The sledgehammer felt heavier than it should have in Daniel Rivera's hands as he stood before the marble statue of the Virgin Mary. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in September, and the abandoned St. Catherine's Church was swallowed in darkness, except for the pale moonlight streaming through shattered stained glass windows. His breath came in short, angry bursts that formed small clouds in the cold night air. For 3 months he had planned this moment, 3 months of rage building like a storm inside his chest, ever since the day his 8-year-old daughter Sofia closed her eyes for the last time in that sterile hospital room. The statue stood serenely in the forgotten corner of the sanctuary, her hands extended in eternal blessing, her marble face carved with an expression of infinite compassion that had once brought Daniel comfort. Now, those hands looked like mockery. That face looked like the cruelest lie ever told. He raised the sledgehammer above his head, muscles trembling with the weight of his fury and grief, every fiber in his body screaming for destruction. "You didn't save her," he whispered to the statue, his voice echoing in the hollow sanctuary like a prayer turned curse. "We prayed to you every night, every single night for months." His knuckles went white as he gripped the wooden handle, splinters digging into his palms. "We lit candles. We said novenas. We begged you." His voice cracked. "You let her die anyway." Before we go deeper into this mystery, take a moment to subscribe to Virgin Mary Mysteries. Stories like this are too powerful to experience alone. The moment Daniel brought the sledgehammer down with all the force of his shattered heart, something impossible happened. A light erupted from the statue, not soft, not gentle, but blinding, white-hot, and so intense that it threw Daniel backwards against the wooden pews with the force of lightning. The light filled every corner of the church, pouring through broken windows like liquid fire, turning night into blazing day for miles around. Car alarms began wailing throughout the neighborhood. House lights flickered on as people stumbled from their beds, confused and frightened by the supernatural glow that painted the sky. But Daniel saw none of this chaos. He was unconscious on the church floor, his body crumpled against the altar steps, the sledgehammer lying useless beside him, its metal head still warm to the touch and vibrating with residual energy. The statue remained untouched, unmarked, perfect. But something fundamental had changed in that blinding eruption of light, something that would haunt Daniel Rivera and transform his understanding of everything he thought he knew about faith, loss, and the impossible. When he finally woke up 3 hours later, the church was dark again, silent as a tomb, but the air still hummed with electricity that made his skin tingle, and the overwhelming scent of roses filled his nostrils, roses that had no earthly source in this abandoned place of worship. Daniel stumbled to his feet, his head pounding, staring at the statue in confusion and growing terror. The Virgin Mary's marble eyes seemed to be looking directly at him now, and for the first time in 3 months, Daniel Rivera began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. 3 months before that night in St. Catherine's Church, Daniel Rivera was a different man entirely. He lived in a small blue house on Maple Street with his wife Elena and their 8-year-old daughter Sofia, and his life revolved around 2 things: his family and his unwavering faith in the Virgin Mary. Every morning, he would kiss Elena goodbye before heading to his construction job, then stop by Sofia's room to whisper a prayer of protection over her sleeping form. The Rivera household was filled with evidence of their devotion. A beautiful statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe stood in the living room, surrounded by fresh flowers. Prayer cards were tucked into picture frames throughout the house. Sofia wore a small silver medal of the Virgin Mary around her neck. Daniel had taught his daughter to pray the rosary when she was just 5 years old, and she would curl up beside him every evening as they said the decades together. "Mama Mary always watches over us, doesn't she, Papa?" Sofia would ask, her dark eyes bright with the absolute faith that only children possess. Daniel would nod and kiss the top of her head, his heart swelling with the certainty that they were protected by divine love. His faith was not just belief. It was the foundation upon which he had built his entire world. Sofia was the light of their lives. She had Elena's gentle spirit and Daniel's determination, but there was something special about her that everyone noticed. She would give her lunch money to homeless people, cry when she saw injured animals, and pray for strangers she met on the street. She was the child who befriended lonely classmates and shared her toys without being asked. The accident happened on a Thursday afternoon in June. Sofia was walking home from school when a driver, texting on his phone, ran a red light. The impact threw her 30 feet across the intersection. Daniel received the call at the construction site, Elena's voice breaking. "You need to come to the hospital now. Sofia's been hurt, really hurt." For 47 days, the Rivera family lived in the pediatric intensive care unit. They prayed novenas to the Virgin Mary. They lit candles at every church in the city. Friends, neighbors, and strangers joined prayer chains that stretched across social media. Daniel and Elena took shifts by Sofia's bedside, holding her small hand, whispering prayers into her unconscious ears, begging for a miracle. "She's going to wake up," Daniel would tell Elena every morning, his voice firm with desperate faith. "Our Lady won't let her die. She protects children." But Sofia's condition only worsened. The doctors spoke in gentle tones about brain swelling, about difficult decisions. On July 15th, at 3:17 in the afternoon, Sofia opened her eyes for the last time. She looked at Daniel and whispered, "Papa, why won't Mama Mary answer?" Then she closed her eyes, and the monitors went silent. In that moment, something inside Daniel Rivera shattered completely. The Virgin Mary had been silent, absent, cruel, and Daniel vowed that night, holding Sofia's still warm body, that if faith was a lie, then he would destroy every reminder of the lie that had stolen his daughter's life. That vow led him to St. Catherine's Church 3 months later, sledgehammer in hand. But the blinding light that erupted when he tried to strike had changed everything. And now Daniel was beginning to understand that some mysteries run deeper than human rage. The days following Daniel's encounter with the blinding light at St. Catherine's Church were unlike anything he had ever experienced. He returned home that night shaken, but convinced himself it had been some kind of electrical malfunction, old wiring, maybe a transformer explosion. He refused to consider any other explanation because the alternative was too terrifying. But the signs began immediately. The first occurred the next morning as Daniel sat at his kitchen table, staring at untouched coffee. The silence in his house was deafening, a silence that had consumed his home since Sofia's funeral. Elena had moved in with her sister, unable to bear the memories. Then, cutting through that terrible quiet, came the sound of a child's laughter, clear, bright, and unmistakably familiar. Daniel's head snapped up, his heart hammering. It was Sofia's laugh, the giggle she made when he would tickle her feet, but it lasted only seconds before fading, leaving him wondering if grief had driven him insane. The second incident happened 3 days later. Daniel had avoided the kitchen radio since Sofia's death because she used to dance to it every morning. But as he walked past it, the radio suddenly crackled to life. Not static, but Sofia's favorite song, "Jesus Loves Me," playing crystal clear through speakers that hadn't worked in months. Daniel yanked the cord from the wall, but the music continued for 30 seconds. His hands trembling, Daniel examined the radio. The cord was unplugged. The batteries had been dead for over a year. There was no explanation for how it could have played music. The roses appeared on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week later. Daniel walked out to get his mail and stopped dead. There, growing wild along his walkway, were dozens of white roses in full bloom. These weren't Elena's roses. Those had been red and died last winter. These white roses seemed to have grown overnight, their petals perfect despite Denver's September weather. Daniel knelt beside them, fingers shaking as he touched the soft petals. They carried that same overwhelming scent from the church, sweet, comforting, impossibly familiar. It was the scent Elena said always followed Sofia wherever she went. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Chen commented on the beautiful roses. "They're stunning, Daniel." But Daniel knew no one had planted them. They had simply appeared, as impossible as the music from the broken radio. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. Daniel was watching television when Sofia's music box began playing from her bedroom upstairs. The melody of Ave Maria drifted down, the same song Sofia listened to every night before praying to the Virgin Mary. Daniel had stored that music box in the attic months ago because hearing it was too painful. But now it played on, note by perfect note, as if invisible hands had wound the key. Daniel climbed the stairs slowly. When he pushed open Sofia's door, he found the music box sitting in the center of her bed, exactly where it used to sit every night, its tiny ballerina spinning gracefully. Daniel sank to his knees, finally understanding that something beyond his comprehension was happening. The Virgin Mary statue he had tried to destroy was reaching across the distance, using Sofia's memory to deliver a message he wasn't ready to hear. But the message was becoming impossible to ignore, and Daniel realized with growing terror that his war against faith had only just begun. 2 weeks after the music box incident, Daniel could no longer deny that something extraordinary was happening. The signs had become too frequent, too specific, too impossible to dismiss as grief-induced hallucinations. But instead of finding comfort, Daniel's rage only intensified. If the Virgin Mary could send him signs through Sofia's memory, then why hadn't she saved his daughter when it mattered most? Word of Daniel's encounter with the blinding light had spread through Denver's Catholic community like wildfire. People began showing up at St. Catherine's, drawn by whispered stories of miracles. They came with candles, flowers, and desperate prayers, transforming the forgotten sanctuary into an impromptu pilgrimage site. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly parishioner, had been the first to witness something truly inexplicable. She came to pray at St. Catherine's on a Tuesday evening, hoping to find the statue that had reportedly glowed with heavenly light. As she knelt before the Virgin Mary, praying for her grandson's recovery from cancer, she swore the statue's marble eyes began to weep. Real tears, she insisted to Father Martinez that night, her voice shaking with awe and fear, tears that fell like droplets of crystal onto the stone floor. The Virgin Mary was crying, Father, and when I touched the tears, they were warm. By Thursday, security cameras had been installed by the diocese to monitor the situation, but the footage they captured defied every rational explanation. The cameras clearly recorded moisture streaming down the statue's face, moisture that seemed to emanate from the marble itself. Father Martinez reviewed the footage himself, running it back frame by frame, searching for any sign of manipulation or malfunction. There was none. The tears appeared spontaneously, flowing down the Virgin Mary's carved cheeks. And stop the moment, Mrs. Rodriguez finished her prayers. If this story is pulling you in, subscribe now and tell me in the comments what you believe is really happening. Your insight might reveal something we haven't seen yet. The news spread beyond Denver's Catholic community and reached Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor of religious studies at the University of Colorado. Dr. Chen was known for her skeptical approach to reported miracles, having debunked dozens of supposed supernatural events. She arrived at St. Catherine's with graduate students, equipped with cameras and chemical analysis tools. But what Dr. Chen discovered challenged everything she thought she knew about faith and reality. The moisture samples they collected contained no trace of human DNA, no chemical composition consistent with groundwater, and no artificial additives. The liquid was pure water, but water that appeared from solid marble with no visible source. I've spent my career explaining away religious phenomena, Dr. Chen admitted in her report, but this case presents evidence that I cannot rationally dispute. Something is happening here that transcends our understanding. Meanwhile, Daniel watched the growing circus around his statue with mounting fury. These people were celebrating what he saw as the cruelest mockery imaginable. The Virgin Mary, who had ignored Sofia's suffering, was now performing tricks for strangers, weeping tears for people she had never met while remaining silent during his daughter's final prayers. But Daniel had no idea that his anger was about to unlock something far more powerful than weeping statues, and that his next encounter with the Virgin Mary would reveal a truth that would shatter his understanding of loss, love, and the mysterious ways grief can become grace. The discovery that would shatter Daniel's remaining skepticism came 3 days after Dr. Chen's report was released. Daniel had been avoiding his house, unable to bear the constant reminders of Sofia and the growing media attention. He had been staying at a motel downtown, but needed to retrieve some documents from his home office. It was a grey October afternoon when Daniel reluctantly pulled into his driveway. The white roses were still blooming impossibly, their petals perfect despite the changing season. Neighbors had been leaving flowers and prayer cards by his gate. Daniel swept the offerings into a trash bag, with angry movements, muttering curses under his breath. Inside, the silence felt different, not just empty, but expectant, as if the walls were holding their breath. Daniel headed toward Sofia's room to collect belongings that Elena had requested. He hadn't been in there since the night the music box had played on its own, and his hands trembled as he turned the doorknob. Sofia's room looked exactly as it had the day she died. Pink walls covered with her artwork, a bookshelf filled with fairy tales, her bed still unmade from that final morning. Daniel moved mechanically, placing stuffed animals and photos into a cardboard box. It was when he reached for her small wooden desk that his world tilted off its axis. There, sitting in the center of Sofia's desk, was her diary, the little pink journal with a heart-shaped lock that she had begged for on her 7th birthday. Daniel stared at it, his blood running cold. This diary had been buried with Sofia. He remembered Elena placing it in her small hands during the viewing. With shaking fingers, Daniel picked up the diary. It felt real, solid, warm to the touch. The lock hung open as if someone had gently turned the tiny key. Against every instinct that screamed this was impossible, Daniel opened to the first page. What he saw there made him sink to his knees on Sofia's bedroom floor. The entries were in Sofia's careful, childish handwriting, but they were dated after her death. August 15th, 3 weeks after her funeral. August 22nd, September 3rd. Each entry written in the distinctive purple ink she had always preferred, with the backwards S she had never quite learned to correct. Dear Diary, the first entry read, I'm okay now. It doesn't hurt anymore. Mama Mary is with me, and she's so beautiful. She told me Papa is very sad and angry, but that's okay, because sometimes people have to feel all the hurt before they can feel all the love. Daniel's vision blurred as tears finally broke free. But it was the entry dated September 30th that made his hands shake violently. Papa went to the church again. Mama Mary showed me. He's so angry at her, but she's not angry at him. She's sad because she loves him and he can't see it yet. Papa thinks she didn't save me, but she did save me. She saved me from pain and brought me home to her. But Papa has to choose if he wants to be saved too. The final entry was dated today, October 15th, written in handwriting that seemed more urgent. Papa is coming home today. Mama Mary says this is his last chance to choose love instead of anger. If he doesn't, she'll have to let him go his own way, even though it will break her heart. Papa, if you're reading this, please don't be scared. She loves you the way she loves me. Come back to the church tonight, but this time, come to listen, not to destroy. I'll be there with her, waiting. Choose love. Daniel clutched the diary to his chest and wept until no tears remained. Everything he thought he knew about reality, death, and faith had just been rewritten in purple ink by an 8-year-old girl who was supposed to be gone forever. But the most terrifying realization was growing in his chest. Sofia was right. Tonight would be his last chance to choose, and the Virgin Mary was waiting for his answer. That evening, Daniel sat in his car outside St. Catherine's Church, Sofia's diary clutched in his hands. Father Martinez's sedan was the only other vehicle in the parking lot. Daniel had called him an hour ago, his voice broken, asking if they could meet. Father Martinez was waiting in the sanctuary when Daniel entered. The statue of the Virgin Mary stood in its alcove, illuminated by a single spotlight. To Daniel, she looked different tonight, not cold and mocking, but expectant, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "You sounded troubled, my son," Father Martinez said gently. "Tell me what's happened." Daniel showed him Sofia's diary, explaining through tears about the impossible entries dated after her death, her messages about choosing love over anger. Father Martinez examined the journal carefully, his expression growing more amazed with each page. "Daniel," Father Martinez said slowly, "there's something you need to know about this statue, something the diocese has kept quiet." The priest retrieved a thick, leather-bound book, parish records dating back to 1924, when St. Catherine's was first built. He opened to a section marked with bookmarks, pages yellowed with age. This statue was carved by Giuseppe Torretti in 1923. He was an Italian sculptor who had lost his 8-year-old daughter, Maria, to tuberculosis. Giuseppe was consumed with rage at God, at the Virgin Mary, at anyone who spoke of divine love while children suffered. Daniel felt his heart stop. 8 years old, the same age as Sofia. Giuseppe spent 2 years carving this statue, pouring all his grief and fury into the marble, but he intended it to be his final act of blasphemy. He carved it to destroy it publicly, to show the world that there was no divine protection for innocent children. "Sheila, what happened?" Daniel whispered. "The night Giuseppe brought his hammer to destroy the statue, witnesses reported a light so bright it could be seen for miles. When they found Giuseppe the next morning, he was on his knees before the statue, weeping. He said the Virgin Mary had spoken to him through his daughter's voice." Father Martinez turned several pages. "Giuseppe became the church's most devoted member. But that's not the end, Daniel. Over the decades, 4 other fathers who lost children have come here with the same intention, to destroy the statue in their rage and grief." The priest showed Daniel photocopied newspaper clippings from 1947, 1963, 1981, and 1998. Each told a similar story, a grieving father attempting to destroy the statue, only to experience something that completely transformed their understanding of loss and faith. Every single one reported the same phenomenon, a blinding light, followed by communication from their deceased children. And in every case, these men went from being filled with rage to becoming some of the most faithful, peace-filled people their communities had ever known. Daniel stared at the statue, understanding that his experience wasn't unique. For nearly a century, this particular image had been calling wounded fathers to encounter something beyond their human understanding of love and loss. "Father Martinez," Daniel said, his voice barely audible, "what if Sofia is right? What if tonight really is my last chance to choose?" The priest placed a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Then perhaps it's time to stop fighting and start listening. She's been waiting for you, Daniel." As if in response, a soft glow began to emanate from the statue's marble surface, and Daniel heard the unmistakable sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through the empty church. The moment of truth had finally arrived. Father Martinez quietly withdrew, understanding that what was about to happen needed to occur between Daniel, the Virgin Mary, and his daughter. Daniel stood alone before the statue, watching as the soft glow emanating from the marble intensified with each passing second. The temperature in the church began to drop, and Daniel's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. The single spotlight flickered and went out. Yet the Virgin Mary's marble surface continued to glow with its own inner light, casting dancing shadows across the sanctuary walls. "I'm here," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking with suppressed emotion. "Sofia said you were waiting for me." The silence was so profound that Daniel could hear his heartbeat echoing in his ears. Then, slowly, the Virgin Mary's marble lips seemed to move. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere at once, not heard with his ears, but felt in his chest, his bones, the very core of his being. "Daniel," the the voice said, carrying depths of compassion that made his knees weak. You came to destroy me because you believed I had abandoned Sofia, but I never left her side, not for a single moment. I was the love that surrounded her every day of her short life. Then why didn't you save her? Daniel cried out, the question that had tormented him for months. Why didn't you stop the car? Why didn't you heal her in the hospital? The glow around the statue intensified, and suddenly Daniel was no longer alone in the church. Standing beside the Virgin Mary, translucent but unmistakably real, was Sofia. She looked exactly as she had in life, 8 years old, with light brown hair in pigtails, wearing her yellow dress. But there was something different now, a radiance that transformed her familiar features into something almost angelic. "Papa?" Sofia said, her voice carrying that same otherworldly quality. "Mama Mary did save me. She saved me from getting stuck in the hurt place. She brought me home where there's no more pain. But you're the one who's stuck now, Papa. Mama Mary wants to save you too, but she can't make you want to be saved." Daniel fell to his knees on the cold stone floor, tears streaming as he looked at his daughter. "Sofia, I miss you so much. I'm so angry, baby. I'm angry at God, angry at her, angry at myself for not protecting you." Sofia stepped forward, her small, translucent hand reaching toward his face. When she touched him, Daniel felt warmth flood through his entire body, carrying with it every memory of holding her as a baby, every bedtime story, every laugh they had shared. "Papa, the angry feelings are because you love me so much. Mama Mary understands them because she felt them too when they hurt her son. But she learned something really important that she wants to teach you." "What?" Daniel whispered. The Virgin Mary's voice filled the church once again. "Love doesn't end, Daniel. Love doesn't fail. Love transforms. Sofia's life wasn't a tragedy that I failed to prevent. It was a gift that death cannot diminish. The love you shared with her will last for eternity, but only if you choose to let it transform your grief into grace." Sofia smiled, the same bright smile that had lit up their house for 8 precious years. "Papa, you can choose to stay stuck in the hurt place, or you can choose to let the love be bigger than the hurt. If you choose love, I'll still be with you. Not the same way as before, but in a new way that's even more beautiful." The Virgin Mary's final words echoed through Daniel's soul. "Choose love, my son. Choose to let your daughter's life be a blessing instead of a curse." As Daniel knelt there, surrounded by impossible light and infinite love, he realized that this moment would determine not just his future, but the very meaning of his daughter's brief, beautiful life. For what felt like an eternity, Daniel knelt in the supernatural glow, feeling the weight of his impossible choice. Sofia's translucent form stood patiently beside the statue, while the Virgin Mary waited with infinite compassion for his decision. "I don't know how," Daniel finally whispered. "I don't know how to choose love when the hurt is so big. I don't know how to let go of being angry when the anger is all I have left of her." Sofia stepped closer, her ethereal hand reaching for his face. "Papa, the angry isn't all you have left of me. You have my drawings on the refrigerator. You have the songs we used to sing in the car. You have 8 years of me loving you and you loving me back. That's what you get to keep forever." "But I wanted more years," Daniel sobbed. "I wanted to see you grow up, get married, have babies of your own." "I know, Papa," Sofia interrupted gently. "But those weren't the years we got. We got different years. We got years where you loved me so much that even now you can't stop loving me. That's a miracle, Papa." The Virgin Mary's voice filled the church one final time. "Daniel, your love for Sofia has the power to heal others walking through their own valleys of grief. Your story can become a light for parents who believe they will never survive the loss of their children, but only if you choose to let love transform your pain into purpose." Daniel looked up at the glowing statue, then at his daughter's radiant face. In that moment, he understood that his choice wasn't about him at all. It was about Sofia's legacy, about whether her brief life would end in bitterness or become a source of hope for countless broken hearts. "I choose love," Daniel whispered. And as soon as the words left his lips, the church erupted in light, so brilliant that it seemed to contain the essence of every star in the universe. The light wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm, enveloping, transformative. Daniel felt it entering every cell of his body, dissolving months of accumulated anger and replacing it with something he had thought was gone forever. Peace. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of grace. When the light finally faded, Daniel found himself alone in the church once more. The statue had returned to its normal marble appearance, though her face seemed somehow more serene. Sofia was gone, but Daniel felt her presence in his heart in a way that was more real than any physical presence could have been. Father Martinez found him there at sunrise, still kneeling before the statue, tears of joy streaming down his transformed face. The priest later said that the entire church seemed to radiate an inexplicable peace that morning. "She saved me," Daniel told Father Martinez, his voice filled with wonder. "She saved Sofia, and then she saved me." The sledgehammer that Daniel had brought to destroy the statue months earlier lay forgotten in the corner, covered in dust. He would never touch it again. Daniel Rivera, once consumed with rage, now overflowing with love, had become exactly what the Virgin Mary intended, a living testament to the transformative power of choosing love over anger, hope over despair, grace over grief. The miracle wasn't that Sofia had somehow returned. The miracle was that Daniel had died to his old self and been reborn into something beautiful. 6 months after that transformative night in St. Catherine's Church, Daniel Rivera had become a man that his former self would have struggled to recognize. Where there had once been consuming rage and bitter grief, there now existed a profound peace that seemed to emanate from his very presence. Where there had once been isolation and despair, there was now purpose that gave his days meaning beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. St. Catherine's Church was no longer abandoned. What had begun as whispered stories about weeping statues and miraculous lights had grown into something much more powerful, a destination for the broken-hearted, a sanctuary for those who had lost children and believed they would never heal. The diocese had officially reopened the church, and Daniel had been appointed as its full-time caretaker, a position that went far beyond maintaining the building to encompass caring for the souls who arrived there seeking hope. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Daniel held what he quietly called Sofia's Circle, grief counseling sessions for parents who had lost children. He never advertised these meetings, never promoted them through any official channels. Word spread organically, one broken heart to another, as parents who had experienced something unexplainable at St. Catherine's returned home and told their stories to others walking through their own valleys of sorrow. Elena had returned from her sister's house 3 months ago. The woman who walked back through the door of their blue house on Maple Street was not the same woman who had fled in anguish after Sofia's funeral. The transformation in Daniel had been so complete, so obviously authentic, that it had awakened something in her own heart that she thought had died forever. They were still rebuilding their marriage, still learning how to love each other through grief instead of despite it, but for the first time since Sofia's death, they were doing it together. The statue of the Virgin Mary had not wept again since the night of Daniel's encounter, but visitors continued to report extraordinary experiences in her presence. Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson had made a full recovery from cancer, something his oncologist called medically inexplicable. A father from New Mexico claimed that his deceased daughter had appeared to him while he prayed before the statue, telling him that she was safe and that he needed to stop blaming himself for the accident. A mother from Kansas swore that she heard her son's voice singing her favorite lullaby while she knelt in the pew where Daniel had made his choice. Daniel documented each of these stories carefully in a leather-bound journal that he kept locked in the church office. Not for the diocese, not for researchers or skeptics who continued to seek rational explanations for the unexplainable, but for Sofia. It had become his way of continuing their conversation, his method of showing her that her sacrifice, her brief but radiant life was still touching hearts and transforming lives months after her death. This morning, as Daniel arranged fresh white roses around the base of the Virgin Mary's statue, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There, tucked between the marble folds of the Virgin's robes, was a small piece of paper. Daniel had cleaned this statue every day for 6 months, and he was certain this note had not been there the night before. With trembling fingers, he extracted the paper and unfolded it. Written in familiar purple ink, in the childish handwriting that had once filled his daughter's diary, were the words, "Papa, get ready. Something really big is about to happen. More people need to choose love. Mama Mary says it's time to tell the whole world our story. I love you." Daniel sank to his knees before the statue, clutching the impossible note to his chest. Just when he thought his story with Sofia had reached its conclusion, she was telling him that it was actually just the beginning. The Virgin Mary's marble face seemed to smile slightly in the morning light, as if she too was preparing for whatever was about to unfold. Outside the church, the first tour bus of the day was pulling into the parking lot, filled with pilgrims from around the world who had come seeking their own encounters with the miraculous. But Daniel had no idea that among those passengers was someone whose arrival would change everything once again, someone whose connection to St. Catherine's Church stretched back much further than anyone could have imagined. The woman who stepped off the tour bus that morning was in her 70s, with silver hair and eyes that held decades of wisdom. She moved purposefully towards St. Catherine's Church, carrying a worn leather satchel. Daniel, still kneeling before the statue with Sofia's latest note, didn't notice her approach until she spoke. "Excuse me," the woman said softly, her voice carrying a slight Italian accent. "Are you Daniel Rivera?" Daniel turned, surprised to be recognized. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The woman smiled. "My name is Maria Torretti Coleman. Giuseppe Torretti was my great-grandfather." Daniel's breath caught. Giuseppe Torretti, the sculptor who had carved the Virgin Mary statue in his own rage and grief, the first father to experience the transformation that Daniel himself had undergone. "I've been searching for this church for 40 years, Maria continued. "Ever since I found my great-grandfather's journal. He wrote about this place, about what happened to him here. He said that someday, when enough love had been planted here, something extraordinary would happen for the whole world to see." Maria opened her satchel and withdrew an ornate wooden box. Giuseppe left instructions. He said when the fifth father had chosen love over anger, when the circle was complete, I was to return this to the statue. "The fifth father," Daniel whispered. "You, Daniel, Giuseppe in 1923, Antonio Morales in 1947, Robert Chen in 1963, James Washington in 1981, Thomas Bradley in 1998, and now you, 6 fathers across a century, each losing a child, each coming to destroy this statue in their rage, each choosing love instead." Maria approached the statue and opened the wooden box. Inside was a small golden heart, glowing with its own inner light. Giuseppe carved this from his wedding ring, melted down and reformed. He said it was meant to hold all the love that grieving fathers would choose over anger. As Maria placed the golden heart into a small hollow in the statue's marble hands that Daniel had never noticed, the entire church began to fill with warm golden light. Not the brilliant white light of Daniel's transformation, but something gentler, more permanent, as if the very air had become sacred. Sofia's voice echoed through the sanctuary one final time. "Papa, this is what Mama Mary was waiting for. Now the whole world will know that love is always stronger than loss, that grace is always bigger than grief." Daniel understood now why Sofia had told him to get ready. This moment, captured by dozens of pilgrims' phones, would become the viral video that spread their story across continents. Within hours, St. Catherine's would become a pilgrimage destination for broken hearts worldwide. Within days, Sofia's message, "Choose love, choose grace, choose hope," would be shared in countless languages. As Daniel watched the golden light dance around the Virgin Mary's serene face, he realized that his daughter's 8 years had not been cut short. They had been perfectly timed to plant seeds of love that would bloom for generations. The Virgin Mary had not failed to save Sofia. She had used Sofia to save the world, one broken heart at a time. If this story moved you, subscribe to Virgin Mary Mysteries so you never miss the next chapter in these extraordinary mysteries.